They fined me $200 for fishing with my son on the lake behind my own house. That was the day everything changed. I had always been the kind of guy who followed the rules. I mowed my lawn on schedule, kept the shutters HOA approved, beige, and waved politely at every board member like my property value depended on it. But when a quiet afternoon of father-son bonding turned into a citation taped to my front door, something in me snapped. They wanted to make an example out of me? Fine. I would give them one they would never forget. I never imagined that casting a line into the water with my 10-year-old son would be the thing that flipped my life upside down. It started as one of those perfect Saturday mornings, the kind where the sun rises just right, the birds are chirping, like something out of a movie, and my kid Ryan is actually excited to spend time with me, not glued to his tablet or gaming headset. We grabbed a couple of old fishing rods from the garage and headed down the slope to the lake that sits quietly behind our neighborhood. That lake was why I bought the house in the first place. Serene, tree-lined, and tucked away, like a little secret only the lucky few of us who lived on its edge got to enjoy. We were out there maybe an hour. Caught nothing but some peace and laughter. It felt good, like the kind of memory he might actually hold on to when he is older. That was the point. That is all I wanted. The trouble started the next day. I came home from the grocery store to find a bright orange notice stuck to my front door. At first, I thought it was a joke. Violation, unauthorized use of community resources, lake fishing prohibited without permit, fine, $200. Signed neatly by the HOA president, Tricia Hawthorne. Of course, now, you have to understand, this lake backs directly into my yard. I can see it from my kitchen sink. My taxes help maintain this neighborhood. And nowhere in the 37 pages of the HOA bylaws I had painfully scanned before. Buying did it say anything about needing a permit to fish, especially not from your own property. Still, I played it calm at first. I figured I would show up at the next HOA meeting, talk like an adult, and get it cleared up. That is what reasonable people do, right? But the meeting was anything but reasonable. Tricia stood there at the head of the table like she was commanding. A courtroom, dressed in a pastel suit like she was running for office. I explained the situation, how it was just me and my son, how we were behind our own house, how no signs were posted about fishing permits. She did not even flinch. Rules are rules, she said, with that brittle smile that always looks like it was painted on with a ruler. If we allow one resident to violate policy, the entire system breaks down. You can appeal, but the fine stands until further review. I looked around the room. Most of the other board members avoided eye contact. A couple of them looked sympathetic, but nobody spoke up. That is when I realized this was not about fishing. It was about control. Tricia loved reminding people who ran this place, and I, apparently, had stepped out of line. I paid the fine. I told myself it was not worth the fight. I had a job, a family, and a mortgage. I did not want trouble. But deep down, I could not let it go. Not because of the money, but because of the message. That someone could stand on their little HOA pedestal and decide when and how I got to enjoy the property I worked every day to afford. That some self-appointed ruler could take something simple and honest, like a moment between a father and son, and stamp it out with bureaucracy and a smirk. After that day, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Tricia's car, always, parked just inches from the fire hydrant, but no citation ever came. The lush, overwatered lawn at her house, during a time when we were all told to conserve. Her friend Shelley's garden fence, which stood well above the height limit. It all clicked. The rules did not apply to everyone, only to the ones who did not bow low enough. Ryan asked me the following weekend if we could go fishing again. I said no. Not because I was afraid of another fine, but because I could not stand the thought of teaching my son that we needed permission to do something so harmless, so normal. And that is when it started. That slow, simmering burn inside me. The kind that wakes you up at night with your jaw clenched and your heart racing, not from fear, but from the realization that you are being stepped on. I started to think about that lake, about who actually owned it, about the paperwork I signed, about how neighborhoods like ours operated, not just on paper, but behind closed doors, and about what would happen if someone, just once, decided not to play by their rules. The funny thing about rules is how often they are used as weapons rather than guidelines. I spent the next few weeks thinking about that every time I passed the lake. It was still there, shimmering quietly under the sun, completely unchanged. But I had changed. I began to dig, not literally, not yet, but into the history of the neighborhood, the lake, and most importantly, the HOA. I stayed up late combing through county records, permits, plats, property deeds, anything I could get my hands on. What I found was interesting. The lake, it turned out, was originally considered common property. It had been designated that way by the developer before the HOA ever existed. That meant it belonged to all homeowners in the neighborhood, not just the HOA as an entity. There was no permit process on file, no ordinance on the books, and certainly no legally binding clause that said I could not fish behind my own house. The HOA had added that policy later, hidden deep in a community newsletter barely anyone read. It was never approved through a proper vote. That was my first win. Not a public one, no, not yet, but a quiet, powerful realization. They had overstepped. I took notes. I printed everything. I organized it into a binder and made copies. Then I started to watch. Every time I saw someone else fishing on the lake, no fine. A kid 2 streets over even posted a photo on the community Facebook page holding a catfish almost as big as him. The comments were filled with praise. No mention of permits, no HOA warning, no orange violation taped to his door. So why me? It was not hard to figure out. Tricia had always looked at me a little differently. Maybe it was because I was not part of the book club crowd. I did not go to their wine mixers or holiday decorating contests. I was not rude, I just kept to myself. I had a job that kept me busy, and when I was home I wanted peace, not drama. That kind of independence made people like her uncomfortable. People who need control see boundaries as threats. Then one afternoon, about a month after the fine, I got home to find Ryan sitting on the back deck looking dejected. I asked him what was wrong. They said I could not fish with my friends, he mumbled. Said it is not allowed anymore. Apparently, a group of neighborhood kids had started gathering near the edge of the lake to try their luck. One of them had even brought a bucket of worms. Someone, Tricia, or one of her loyal HOA hawks, called their parents to complain. Now the kids were banned from going near the water unsupervised. Ryan felt like he had started the trouble. That was the final spark. I had tried to follow the rules. I had tried to be respectful. But when someone uses power not to protect, but to punish, they do not deserve to hold it. So I made a decision. If the HOA wanted to act like they owned the lake, then I was going to show them what real ownership looked like. I filed a petition with the county for recreational rights on my property, including access to the water line. Since my backyard sloped directly into the lake, I had every right to utilize the water for personal, non-commercial use. I even had a lawyer friend review it. Everything was clean, legal, bulletproof. Next, I built a small dock. Nothing fancy, just a sturdy wooden platform that extended about 10 feet into the water. I did it myself over the course of 2 weekends, with Ryan handing me nails and measuring tape like my little apprentice. He thought it was the coolest thing ever. Our fishing spot, he called it. Of course, it did not take long for the HOA to notice. Tricia showed up at my door one morning, her posture stiff, holding a clipboard like it was a shield. She did not even greet me. "You did not get approval for that structure," she said, gesturing toward the dock. "I did not need it," I replied. handing her a copy of the county permit and the documents showing my property line extended to the water's edge. She skimmed them, frowning. "This is highly irregular," she muttered. "But not illegal," I said, keeping my voice calm. "In fact, if you take a closer look at Section 12 here, you will see, I will have our legal counsel review it. Please do." She left without saying goodbye. From that point on, things got weird, subtle at first. I started getting reminder notices from the HOA, claims that my trash bins were visible from the street, that my grass was half an inch too high, that my mailbox paint was faded. Petty things. Clearly retaliation. I took photos, dated them, documented everything. Then I did something I knew they would hate. I opened the lake. I invited the neighborhood kids to fish off my dock anytime they wanted. I bought extra rods. I kept a cooler with cold sodas and popsicles nearby, and a small tackle box labeled community use. Parents started stopping by, chatting with me while their kids caught bluegill and tossed them back into the water. Word spread. My little slice of the lake became the most peaceful, joyful corner of the neighborhood, and Tricia hated every second of it. At the next HOA meeting, she tried to push a new rule banning all private structures near the lake. But this time, something had shifted. The room was not as silent as it had been before. A couple of parents stood up. One man, whose daughter had caught her first fish off my dock, even said, "Honestly, this neighborhood has not felt this neighborly in years. Maybe we should be encouraging more of this, not less." Tricia looked like she had swallowed a lemon. She tabled the vote. That night I stood on the dock with Ryan, watching the moonlight shimmer on the water. He leaned against me and said, "I like it better this way." So did I. But I knew it was not over yet. Not with someone like Tricia. Not with power at stake. She was going to push harder. Try something bigger, and I was ready. The official notice came on a Wednesday. It was not an envelope this time. It was a formal document, delivered by courier, sealed and signed. The HOA was suing me. They were accusing me of violating community bylaws, endangering neighborhood safety with an unauthorized structure, and creating a nuisance on common property. It was a full-on legal attack. I will not lie. I felt it in my gut when I read it. That tight, cold punch of fear. Even if I knew I had the law on my side, the idea of going to court, of paying lawyer fees, of having this dragged through weeks, maybe months of legal drama, made my stomach churn. But fear, I have learned, is not always a sign to retreat. Sometimes it is a sign you are close to something worth fighting for. So I fought. I called my lawyer friend Alan. He took one look at the HOA's paperwork and shook his head. "They are bluffing," he said. "This is a scare tactic. You are well within your rights. But we are going to respond, strong and loud." We filed a formal rebuttal, along with every document I had gathered. The property maps, the building permits, photos of the dock, statements from neighbors who supported what I had built. One mom even offered to write a letter saying her son's anxiety had eased because he found peace fishing off our dock. I included that too. Every little piece of truth. In the meantime, things in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. The HOA sent a patrol, yes, a literal patrol, of 2 volunteers to monitor lake activity. They walked back and forth every evening, writing in little notebooks, glaring at the kids who came to fish. At one point, one of them scolded a 12-year-old boy for creating a tripping hazard by leaving a tackle box open. Parents were livid. The Facebook group exploded. This is when everything started turning. People who had stayed silent before, either out of politeness or fear, started speaking up. One neighbor posted, "Why is the HOA policing kids fishing when we still have potholes in the front entrance road?" Another said, "I would rather my kids fish in daylight than be inside glued to their screens." Tricia tried to control the narrative. She posted an official message full of legal jargon and phrases like community preservation and unauthorized use of common resources. But the damage was done. The mask had slipped. That Friday, something unexpected happened. A local news outlet, just a small community paper, ran a story titled, "Fishing for Trouble, HOA Lawsuit Sparks Neighborhood Tension." I had no idea who tipped them off, but they showed up at my door with a notepad and a camera, asking if I would speak on record. I agreed. I told them everything, from the fine taped to my door, to the joy on my son's face when he caught his first fish. I showed them the dock. I showed them the permission documents. I did not speak with anger. I spoke with sincerity. That weekend, the story blew up locally. I guess people love a good underdog versus HOA saga. Emails started coming in. One guy, from a nearby town, sent me a message that just said, "Thank you. You are doing what the rest of us wish we could." But then came the real blow. Tricia showed up again, this time flanked by another board member, a man I had barely spoken to before. They said they wanted to mediate. Their tone was different, not polite, not angry, just calculating. "We are willing to withdraw the lawsuit," Tricia said, "if you agree to remove the dock and stop allowing community access from your yard." I looked at her, then at Ryan, who had quietly come outside and stood by my side. "No," I said. "You do not get to bully people and then bargain when it backfires. That dock stays. The kids stay." She frowned. "You are being unreasonable." "No," I said again. "I am just not afraid of you anymore." That was the moment something in her cracked. She did not yell. She did not argue. She just blinked, as if seeing me for the first time. Not as a troublemaker, but as someone she could not control. She left without another word. The following week, we got the official notice from the HOA attorney. The lawsuit was dropped with prejudice, which meant they could not refile it. We had won. But the war was not just about permits and docks. It was about something deeper. Ownership of space, yes, but also ownership of voice, of peace, of freedom. That night we celebrated. Neighbors brought snacks and folding chairs and gathered by the dock. Kids laughed and fished. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker and played soft music. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lake shimmered with life. My wife made lemonade. Ryan caught a catfish the size of his arm and proudly showed it to every person within 20 feet. I looked around and felt something swell inside me. This was what community should feel. Like not fear, not control, not punishment, but joy, belonging, and the quiet sound of water under a dock built with intention. For the first time in months, I exhaled fully. But even in that moment of triumph, I knew one thing for sure. Tricia was not done. People, like her, do not go quietly, and if she came back for another round, well, I would be ready. By the start of the summer, everything had changed. The dock was no longer just a platform of wood extending into the lake. It had become a symbol. Kids came by after school to fish, sometimes with their parents. A couple of retirees started showing up early in the mornings, sipping coffee from thermoses while watching the sunrise. One of them, Mr. Daniels, said he had not sat by the water since his wife passed. "Reminds me of when we were young," he told me, eyes glinting with something more than just memory. It felt good, right, to share that space. The HOA, on the other hand, had gone uncharacteristically quiet. No more notices, no patrols, no passive-aggressive emails with the subject line, "Friendly Reminder." Tricia had stepped back from her usual leadership role. Word had it, a few board members had privately questioned her judgment after the lawsuit. There was talk of a vote to restructure the board entirely. I stayed out of it. I did not want revenge. I wanted peace. But the lake was mine now. Not in a selfish, possessive way, but in spirit. I had taken something they tried to weaponize and made it something everyone could enjoy. It did not mean I let my guard down. I kept every record, every photograph, every letter of support in a folder tucked into my desk drawer, just in case. I stayed prepared, but I no longer carried the weight of fear on my shoulders. That was the biggest change. One afternoon in July, as the sun baked the lawn and dragonflies zipped across the water, Tricia walked by, alone this time. She paused near the edge of my yard, as if considering whether to come closer. I saw her. For a moment, we just stood there watching each other. She looked tired. Not defeated, but worn down in a way that made her seem smaller than I remembered. "I was wrong about you," she finally said. It was not an apology, not really, but it was something. "You did not know me," I replied, calm and even. She nodded, slightly. "I thought if we gave in once, it would spiral. You know, chaos, people breaking rules." "And what happened instead?" I asked. She looked out at the water, where a little girl giggled as her bobber disappeared beneath the surface. "People got happier." I said nothing. I did not have to. After a moment, she left. That was the last conversation we ever had. In August, the HOA held a meeting. I was invited, for the first time, not as an accused member, but as a community voice. They asked me to speak. I kept it simple. I talked about how the lake had brought us together. How shared spaces only work when they are truly shared. I talked about inclusion, about the value of nature, about kids learning to sit still long enough to catch something more than just a fish. The vote to revise the lake usage policies passed unanimously. They created a community lake committee, volunteer-based. I was nominated as the head, which I gently declined. I recommended Linda from 2 houses down, retired, organized, full of energy, and loved by everyone. She took it gladly. I had done my part. It was time to let others step up. Still, I stayed involved in small ways. I helped maintain the dock, installed a bench at the end of it, and added a wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Fisher's Point." It was Ryan's idea. Said it made it feel official. The name stuck. Ryan, by the way, had become something of a local legend. At school, kids started calling him the Lake Kid. He took it in stride, and every Saturday he led a little fishing club for the younger ones, teaching them how to bait hooks, untangle lines, and release fish gently. His confidence grew in ways I could not have predicted. It is strange, looking back, how a single moment, a harmless act of casting a line into the water, can spiral into something so much bigger, and how, sometimes, punishment can be the seed of something powerful. Not because it was fair, but because it forced you to stand up, speak out, and push back. I never asked to be the face of a neighborhood rebellion. I was just a guy trying to fish with his kid. But sometimes life hands you a line, and you can either drop it or reel in something unexpected. One evening, near the end of summer, I sat at the end of the dock as the sun melted into the horizon, painting the lake gold and red. Ryan was beside me, feet dangling over the edge, quiet and content. "You glad we fought back?" he asked. I turned to him, surprised by the question. "Yes," I said. "More than I can say." He nodded, thoughtful. Then he said, "Me too. I think this dock made me brave." And just like that, I understood everything. Because in fighting for a simple right, we had created something lasting, not just a platform or a rule change, but a place where people found courage, joy, belonging, a place where kids grew into themselves, a place where peace was no longer just the sound of water, but the feeling of knowing you stood for something that mattered. That was the real victory. And no HOA, no matter how strict or misguided, could ever take that away. It has been over a year now since I cast that first line into the lake and started all of this without realizing it. Funny how something so ordinary, just a man fishing with his kid, can become the spark for something extraordinary. When I look back on it, I do not see revenge or spite or even rebellion. I see change. Real, meaningful change born out of frustration, yes, but also out of love. Love for my son. Love for peace. Love for the quiet moments we are too often told to give up in the name of rules. There were times I questioned myself, times I wondered if I had gone too far, if I should have just let it go and moved on. But every time those doubts crept in, something reminded me why I did not. It was the little girl who caught her first fish and screamed with joy so loud the ducks scattered. It was the elderly couple who started walking to the lake every evening, hand in hand, to watch the sunset like they used to before arthritis and grief slowed them down. It was the neighbor who told me his teenage son had stopped scrolling through his phone long enough to learn how to tie a proper fishing knot. These were not just side effects, they were the heart of it, and for me, personally, something deeper changed. I used to think staying quiet was the best way to get by. Do not stir the pot, follow the rules, be a good neighbor. But silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes, it just means you are letting the wrong people write the rules. I learned that the hard way. But I am glad I did. Because once you stand up, really stand up, not just for yourself, but for something larger, you start to see the world differently. You start to notice who benefits from silence. You start to ask questions like, who says we cannot? Why is this wrong? What happens if we say no? And sometimes, those questions are the beginning of everything. Now, when I walk by the lake, I do not see the anger or the fight anymore. I see people, smiling, laughing, living. I see a space that used to be controlled by fear and replaced with freedom. I see a lake that belongs to all of us. Ryan still fishes almost every weekend. He is taller now. His voice is deeper. But he still grins the same way when he reels in a catch. And every time he does, I feel that same quiet pride swell in my chest. Not because he caught something, but because he never stopped showing up. He never backed down. I like to think I gave him that. One night, just a few weeks ago, we sat out on the dock together. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a blanket. The stars were just starting to peek through the sky, and the air smelled like summer's last breath. You know, he said, looking out over the water, I think this lake feels like home now. I smiled. It always was. He leaned his head on my shoulder for a moment. He does not do that as much anymore, being a teenager and all. But when he did, I felt it. Something settled deep inside. Peace. The kind that does not ask for permission. The kind you earn. And that is what this was all about. Not fighting the HOA, not lawsuits or dock permits. It was about finding peace in the places where it matters most, and holding on to it with everything you have. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone tells you no, when the thing you are doing is good, kind, and harmless, do not fold. Ask why. Push back. And if you need to, take the damn lake, build the dock, turn the tables. Because sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. Sometimes the best way to be a good neighbor is to remind everyone that community is not about control. It is about care. It is about showing up, standing up, and creating something better, not just for you, but for everyone around you. And if anyone tells you that you cannot fish with your kid on a quiet Sunday morning, you look them in the eye and tell them this. I turned a punishment into a platform. I built a dock from the ground up. I gave people their peace back, and I would do it again.